The bus jolted as it pulled away from the curb, tires hissing against asphalt, slick from a light drizzle that had fallen earlier. Los Angeles in early evening was always a grind of neon and exhaustion. People packed shoulder to shoulder, faces gray from office light, stomachs growling at the smell of fried food leaking in from street vendors. Inside, the air was a dense stew of deodorant, cheap cologne, coffee breath, and the metallic tang of rain carried in on coats. Every seat was taken. People stood clutching the bars, their weight swaying with each turn. At first, it was ordinary. Commuters scrolling on phones, earbuds sealing them off. A young couple whispered. A man in paint-smeared boots dozed against the window, his head knocking glass every bump. Toward the middle, a small knot of school kids giggled nervously at memes one showed on his phone, while a woman in her 70s stood quietly near the front, holding the pole. She wore a tan coat, a little too big, sleeves brushing her knuckles, lines etched deep in her face, but her posture was upright, the kind of dignity that refuses to fold even when it hurts. The disruption came without warning. A tall man in a bomber jacket pushed down the aisle, impatient. His shoulders rolled wide as if the narrow bus should bend to him. He muttered as he passed others, clipped an elbow here, a bag there, but didn't slow. When the older woman shifted slightly to let him through, he snapped, "Move already!" And with the heel of his palm, he shoved her. It wasn't violent in the cinematic sense, no flying body, no crunch of impact. It was casual cruelty, the kind born of someone who doesn't expect to be stopped. But on a moving bus, casual can break bones. Her hand slipped from the pole. She pitched sideways, knees buckling, and hit the floor with a hollow sound, half thud, half gasp. The bus went quiet. No scream, no explosion of voices, just the sharp intake of air from 40 people who suddenly didn't know what to do. The school kids froze mid-laugh, screens glowing forgotten in their hands. A mother pulled her daughter closer to her chest, eyes wide. One man half rose from his seat, then sat back down, guilty before he even decided. A woman reached for her phone, thumb hovering. Call the police? Record? Nobody moved fast enough. The old woman groaned softly, a sound that clawed at the silence harder than a shout. A teenager bent down to help, stammering, but she waved him off weakly, pride still intact even as pain folded her body. And the man? He didn't look down. He stood tall in the aisle, sneer tugging at his mouth, as if the fall behind him were background noise. He adjusted his jacket, sniffed, muttered something about people being in the way. Then he leaned against the railing like nothing had happened, staring out the window at a billboard glowing with detergent smiles. The silence thickened into something ugly. People wanted to speak, to act, but their throats closed. Fear of escalation sat heavy in the air. Fear of violence. Fear of being pulled into something messy. Fear of being noticed. Better to watch. Better to scroll again. Pretend. The bus slowed at a red light, and in that slowing, a new sound entered. The soft scrape of fabric, the thud of boots on floor. From the very back, a figure rose. At first, no one cared. Plenty of passengers got off here, but this one didn't head toward the door. A hood shadowed her face, her hands tucked calmly into her pockets. She walked the aisle with steady steps, the sway of the bus making the motion look like a predator's glide. The children nearest the back noticed first. Their whispers cracked open into recognition, then spread forward like a fuse. Eyes darted, breaths quickened. A name hissed through lips, not yet loud, but insistent. "Is that? No way!" She stopped halfway, just behind the man who'd pushed. He didn't notice her yet. He was too busy staring at his reflection in the window, smirk still carved across it. But the others saw. The hood shifted as she looked down at the woman on the floor. The old woman struggling, jaw tight, refusing pity. The figure crouched briefly, steadying her elbow, helping her rise without fanfare. And in that brief lowering of the hood, The lights of the bus caught her face. Strong jaw, piercing eyes, the unmistakable presence of someone the world knew too well. Gasps spread like wind through dry leaves. A teenager's whisper turned into a stammer. "It's her. That's Ronda Rousey." The words rippled outward. Even those who hadn't recognized her from the back now saw it clearly. The fighter. The one who'd made careers end in seconds. The one whose silence carried more threat than a dozen shouted promises. The bus became an arena in that instant. Not because she raised a fist, not because she said a word, but because she hadn't. She helped her mother steady herself against a seat, then straightened. Her hood fell fully back now. She stood still, eyes locked on the man who still hadn't turned around. The tension that filled the air wasn't from his shove, or from the fall. It was from the question suddenly on everyone's tongue. What happens when a man who believes in his own impunity realizes he isn't alone anymore? The bus waited, and the silence was worse than any shout. Just wondering, "Where are you watching from? Write it down, Bello." He felt the shift in the air before he understood why. A silence heavier than the engine hum spread up the aisle, settling on every passenger like a weight. He smirked, mistaking it for guilt, for their hesitation to confront him. He turned slightly, not far enough to catch the face behind him, and chose bravado. "Look, she stumbled. That's all. People stand in the aisle. They fall. That's physics." He threw the word out as if it excused him. A few passengers winced. A teenager shook his head, but said nothing. The old woman still crouched near the floor, hand clutching the seat for balance. She pressed her lips together and tried to stand, pride stiffening her back, even as pain twisted her features. Her daughter steadied her, then let go when the older woman whispered, "Leave it. Don't make this worse." He raised his voice. "She walked into me. You all saw it. I barely touched her." He held his hands high like he was on trial, grin spreading wider. "You people act like I punched her." No one laughed. The bus driver's eyes flicked into the mirror, then forward again. A baby whimpered. The rhythm of the bus wheels against asphalt was the only sound. Someone finally spoke. A college kid in a faded hoodie leaned forward. "You shoved her, man." "We saw it." The tall man snapped his gaze toward him, jaw tight. "Mind your business. All of you." His voice cracked with more force than confidence. He needed the crowd on his side. "I got places to be. You want me to beg every stranger to move? Number. I say move, you move." The words landed poorly. Even those who had stayed neutral shifted in their seats, and from the middle of the bus came a murmur, hesitant but insistent. "That's her. That's Ronda Rousey." It passed through the rows like static electricity. Phones rose slowly, not to record, but to confirm. The man finally turned fully, eyes locking with hers. Recognition was not immediate. He saw only a hooded figure, face calm, eyes direct. No flinch, no tremor. Her stillness unnerved him more than anger would have. He barked a laugh, too loud. "Yeah, right, sure. And I'm the president." He let the sarcasm ride, but a seed of doubt rooted itself in the way his grin didn't touch his eyes. Rhonda's mother tugged at her sleeve again, whispering, "Please, not here." The plea trembled with years of knowing what violence cost, but Rhonda's silence held. She didn't posture. She didn't rise to the bait. She simply stood between her mother and the man, her breathing steady. His discomfort grew, and he filled it with noise. "What are you? The bus cop? What, gonna hit me in front of kids?" He gestured at the rows as if they were his witnesses, his jury. "Don't tell me how to act. Not you, not anybody." Her response came low, calm, unshaken. "You pushed my mother." The fact itself, nothing more. He scoffed, heat rising on his neck. "She was in the way." "Then you wait," she said. The words landed heavier than any shove. A few passengers nodded subtly. A man near the back muttered, "Exactly." The energy shifted. The bully felt it. He tried again, desperate to reclaim ground. "You don't get to lecture me. Who even are you?" The irony cut him. By now, half the bus had whispered her name. Her mother's hand trembled against the rail, eyes wet. She wanted an exit, peace, survival. But survival had already been broken the moment a shove sent her to the ground. The man took a step closer, his frame blotting out the fluorescent light. The aisle narrowed to a few inches of air. Passengers leaned forward, breath caught in their throats. The driver's knuckles whitened on the wheel, but he didn't move. He squared his shoulders, chest out. "What are you gonna do, huh? You gonna prove me right? Hit me here?" His laugh came thin, desperate. No one joined him. Rhonda didn't move. Her stillness expanded until the bus seemed to shrink around it. He could hear his pulse in his ears, the hum of blood louder than the city outside. A child started crying near the back, the sound sharp and naked. The mother rocked gently, eyes locked on the scene unfolding. No one dared to speak now. The tall man clenched his fists, jaw tight, but his eyes betrayed the first glint of doubt. He hadn't expected silence to be louder than violence. He hadn't expected a crowd to lean toward someone else. She raised her hand slightly, not toward him, but into the space between them, palm open as if defining a boundary. It was a gesture so controlled, so exact, that the entire bus leaned in. He sneered, shifting forward again, refusing to give up ground. But the aisle no longer belonged to him. Every breath, every whisper, every phone camera tilted toward her, and the moment stretched, the floor trembling under wheels that had stopped rolling. The bus no longer felt like transportation. It had turned into a sealed chamber, the kind where every noise gets amplified and every breath feels shared. People clung to the poles and straps, not just for balance, but for something to hold on to. The driver's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, foot heavy on the brake, though the light had already turned green. Outside, the city kept moving, neon signs blinking, horns bleating. But inside, time pressed slow and dense, as if 40 strangers had become one audience waiting for the curtain to rise. The man tried to reclaim the air with his voice. "You gonna hit me here? In front of kids?" He said it like a dare, grinning with too many teeth. A couple of nervous chuckles fluttered up from passengers who wanted the moment to break, but the laughter fell flat before it reached the ceiling. It sounded brittle, like glass, ready to crack. Then came the sound that cut through, a child crying, high-pitched, broken, the kind of cry that wasn't about hunger or tiredness, but confusion and fear. The sister joined, setting off an echo that knotted adult stomachs. A mother rocked them both, whispering soft reassurances, though her eyes stayed fixed on the two figures in the aisle. The wailing made the tension unbearable. This wasn't just a standoff now. It was a demonstration in front of witnesses too young to unsee it. Rhonda didn't flinch. She stood square, heels grounded in the rubber flooring, shoulders loose but ready. Her silence carried weight. She didn't need to raise her voice. The quiet wrapped the aisle like a cord. The man stepped in close, chest grazing the fabric of her hoodie, expecting a retreat. But she didn't step back. The absence of movement was louder than a shout. He faltered, only for a second, but the room felt it. His grin snapped back into place, but his eyes gave him away. He scanned left and right, searching for support. Faces looked back, unimpressed, steady. A college kid in a hoodie sat straighter. A postal worker with weathered hands leaned forward, square to the aisle. Two teenagers gripped their phones halfway between recording and trembling. The bus had chosen a side without saying it. "Move!" the man ordered, but his voice had lost volume. "She was pushed," someone said from the middle rows, low but clear. The source was swallowed in the crowd. It didn't matter who said it. The words belonged to everyone. He tried to laugh it off. "This is insane." "I barely touched her." You're acting like I broke her bones." His tone pleaded for sympathy, but didn't find it. He pointed at the older woman. "Tell them! Tell them I didn't do anything!" The older woman raised her chin. Pain etched her face, but her voice was steady gravel. "You pushed." 2 words, final as a gavel. The bus shifted. Even the crying quieted, as if the toddlers sensed the verdict had been spoken. A soda can rolled under seats and tapped against a boot, loud as a drum in the stillness. He leaned again, this time with his elbow grazing her ribs, just enough to bait her into contact first. His plan was obvious: force her to react, then paint himself as the victim. But she lifted her hand, palm open, stopping an inch short of his chest. Not touching, not striking, just a boundary drawn in air. "Here," she said, voice low but cutting through the bus. The word carried the precision of a ruler snapping into place. Passengers shifted, eyes wide. A woman crossed herself. The college kid whispered "don't" under his breath. The man sneered, desperate to recover. "You're making a scene over nothing. You're not the main character here, sweetheart." He spat the last word, sharp as a slap. No one laughed now. The bus winced as one body, but Rhonda stayed motionless. "Enough," she said, tilting her head ever so slightly. Not a plea, a statement. The aisle shrank around the word. He reached past her shoulder, grabbing for the pole as if to slip by, brushing her in the process. Contact, small but undeniable. The passengers froze, breath caught. The driver muttered, "Stop!" voice cracking like a prayer. The man squared up again, closer than before, breath sour with coffee and rage. The toddlers stopped crying, replaced by a silence so fragile it felt dangerous. Even the flicker of the overhead light slowed, casting shadows that stretched too long. Rhonda shifted her weight by a fraction, so slight a camera wouldn't catch it, but the aisle felt it, like the ground itself had tilted. He frowned, confused by the sensation, as if gravity had chosen sides. "Last chance," the college kid said, surprising himself with his own courage. The old woman said nothing, jaw locked, spine tall. "Move," the man repeated, but now it was barely more than a plea. Rhonda's eyes didn't leave his. She looked past his bravado, past his anger, straight into the place where decisions were made. "No," she said. He drew his shoulder back, winding up for a hard bump, one meant to disguise force as accident. The bus leaned with him, 40 strangers all holding one thin breath. The driver's foot hovered over the gas. A child hiccuped, then stilled. The aisle narrowed into a blade. Every angle sharpened. The fluorescent hum, the shifting bodies, the heat rising from packed coats. Time slowed. His knee lifted. Her palm held steady. And the bus, suspended between violence and restraint, waited for the explosion that hadn't yet come. The man's voice cracked the air like cheap glass. He threw it down the aisle as though volume could erase the truth. "You all think you're heroes now, huh? Sitting there with your phones, whispering behind my back? You're all tough until someone actually puts a hand on you." He jabbed a finger toward the rows of passengers. His grin was gone now, replaced with a mask of red-cheeked fury. The louder he got, the smaller he seemed. Phones rose like shields. A dozen lenses caught the sweat shining on his forehead, the jerky way his shoulders pitched with each insult. A middle-aged woman shouted from the back, "Just stop already!" Another voice snapped, "Apologize!" But their anger was scattered, uncertain. The crowd had become a jury without rules, verdict waiting on the woman in the hoodie. Rhonda stepped forward. Not fast, not threatening. A single stride that carried more weight than his shouting ever could. Her face was unreadable, her breath even. She didn't raise a hand, didn't break her silence, but the pressure in the aisle thickened until people shifted in their seats as if oxygen had thinned. Her presence pressed harder than any fist. He barked louder, mistaking noise for control. "What are you gonna do? Just stare at me?" That all you got? You're nothing without the cameras." His voice cracked on the last word, betraying strain. The crowd heard it. The more he screamed, the weaker he looked. She moved closer again, now inside the range where a push would come without warning, her eyes locked on his, steady as stone. The contrast was unbearable, his body jerking, hands slicing the air, while hers stayed anchored, economical, as if every twitch of his was already mapped and countered. The bus itself seemed to lean in. A teenager whispered, "She's not even touching him," and the words rippled through the rows. His frustration spiked. He needed action, something physical to puncture the silence that made him look like a clown. His arm jerked back, shoulder cocked. He aimed for the same cheap shove he'd given her mother. Casual, dismissive, designed to humiliate more than hurt. But fate joined in. The driver, rattled by the rising noise, stomped the brake harder than he meant to. The world lurched. Bodies slammed forward. Bags tumbled from laps. A man cursed as he gripped to the rail, knuckles whitening. Someone yelped in pain when a phone cracked against their temple. The toddlers screamed again. Passengers grabbed whatever they could, poles, seats, strangers' jackets, to stay upright. And in the middle of it all, the man's shove blurred into chaos. To everyone watching, it looked like the first strike. Gasps ripped through the bus. A woman shrieked. A chorus of voices exploded. "He hit her!" "Stop it!" "Oh my God!" The aisle became a stage of panic, the line between accident and intent erased by timing. The man stumbled, swore, and tried to regain footing. But the crowd had already decided what it had seen. Phones stayed up, trembling but unblinking. Dozens of red recording lights glowed like tiny judgments. The college kid stood halfway now, voice sharp. "Back off!" His shout cracked louder than the man's threats. Ronda didn't flinch during the jolt. Her balance stayed centered, feet firm even as the bus rocked. She let the storm of motion wash past her. And when it stilled, she was closer than before, her face inches from his. He blinked, realizing that in the chaos, she hadn't staggered, hadn't raised her arms, hadn't even broken posture. While everyone else scrambled, she remained rooted. It was more than unsettling. It was terrifying. The crowd's perception had shifted. He wasn't the man shouting anymore. He was the man flailing while she stood calm. The bus had its verdict, and the energy swung hard against him. "You're finished," someone muttered. Another voice, shaky but sure, called out, "We're all seeing this." His chest heaved, more from panic than effort. He jabbed at her again, trying to reclaim ground. But the rhythm was gone. Each attempt at intimidation only deepened the gulf. The silence returned, heavier now. She still hadn't raised a hand. Her mother, steadying herself on the rail, watched with a mix of dread and pride. Fear for her daughter's restraint. Pride that restraint was stronger than violence. The bus moved forward again, wheels rolling, but no one noticed. All eyes stayed fixed on the two figures in the aisle. The man's voice, once booming, had shrunk to ragged breaths. The power no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the silence, and to the woman who commanded it. And then, with one sudden step, he lunged, hand flashing out as if to repeat the shove. The crowd screamed. The driver's shout split the moment like glass shattering. "Enough! I'm calling the police!" His voice cracked, raw with fear, but it was already too late. The lunge had committed itself, the air had broken, and nothing could rewind it. The man's hand darted for Ronda's shoulder, fingers wide, aiming to shove her aside, to prove to everyone he still controlled the aisle. But she wasn't there in the way he expected. She shifted just half a step, a turn barely visible, and the space betrayed him. His wrist met her grip before he realized he'd lost it. The move was nothing flashy, nothing theatrical. No violent twist, no cinematic throw. It was a technician's gesture, honed through years of practice until it became invisible. A rotation of her hips, her hand catching his, her weight sinking, and in an instant his momentum collapsed into her control. He froze, disbelief flashing across his face, but his body told the truth. His arm was trapped, shoulder bent at a painful angle, wrist pinned against her chest. He tried to pull back, but every tug only deepened the lock. His knees wobbled. The crowd inhaled as one. For the first time all night, he wasn't the aggressor. He was the object. The bus fell silent. Not the silence of hesitation, but the silence of awe. The kind that prickles your skin because you know you've just witnessed something irreversible. Only his ragged breathing filled the void. "Holy shit!" someone whispered. "Don't break it!" another voice cried, sharp with panic. A woman in the back sobbed once, the sound cracking under pressure. He thrashed, twisting, trying to muscle out, but the harder he fought, the tighter her hold became. He realized it then, that every ounce of strength he spent fed directly into her control. He wasn't fighting her anymore, he was fighting physics, and physics had no mercy. She stood calm, posture steady, grip unshakable. Her breathing was so even it looked rehearsed. She didn't look angry. She looked inevitable. The toddlers had stopped crying. Wide-eyed, they stared through damp lashes, their fear dissolving into something new, astonishment. The crowd felt it too. This wasn't violence, this was discipline. Her mother watched, hands gripping the rail so hard her knuckles whitened. Pride and fear battled in her chest. Pride that her daughter could end it with a flick of her wrist. Fear of what ending it might cost. The man's face shifted from defiance to panic. His teeth clenched, sweat dripping into his eyes. He tugged again, harder this time, but the motion only sent pain shooting up his arm. His breath broke into gasps. "Let go!" he hissed, voice cracking under strain. Ronda leaned slightly, pressure increasing just enough to remind him of the edge he was dangling over. The bus passengers groaned in chorus at the sight, shoulders tightening as though they felt it themselves. And then came the moment no one expected. She bent closer, her lips inches from his ear. Her voice was too low for the bus to hear. Only he caught the words. Whatever she said, it wasn't long. 2, maybe 3 words, but the effect was instant. His face drained. The arrogance collapsed. Fear spread across his expression like ink in water, blotting out everything else. The same mouth that had filled the bus with insults now quivered in silence. "What did she say?" someone whispered aloud, but no one had the answer. The man stopped resisting. His body slackened in her hold, not because she'd broken him physically, but because the words had reached somewhere deeper. His pride had been stripped bare, his bluster punctured. He knew it, and so did the crowd. The silence grew unbearable. A teenager muttered, "She's gonna snap it." Another voice hissed, "Don't look, kids." But the kids didn't look away. They stared harder, eyes reflecting the raw truth unfolding in front of them. Ronda held him there, arm pinned, body folded. She didn't celebrate, didn't snarl, didn't even blink. Her calmness was worse than rage. It showed she didn't need rage. She already owned the outcome. And the man, sweat dripping, chest heaving, realized it too. She didn't wrench or twist. She just let go. The release was so sudden the man stumbled sideways, crashing into a plastic seat, clutching his arm like it might detach if he didn't hold it. For a second, the entire bus was quiet, suspended in the vacuum left by an ending no one quite believed. Then came the eruption. Applause from the back, nervous but insistent, rolled forward like a wave. Others shouted, some in relief, some in outrage, some just to fill the space. "That's it! We all saw it! It's on video!" The sound of phones clicking, recording lights blinking, screens trembling in hands, turned the bus into a courtroom. Everyone had become both juror and reporter. The man stayed bent over, staring at the floor. He didn't try to meet anyone's eyes. The voice that had filled the aisle minutes earlier was gone. His breath rasped through clenched teeth, the only sound he still owned. Pride, when it breaks, makes a noise of its own, and the bus heard it. Rhonda didn't celebrate. She didn't raise her arms or announce a victory. She stood where she was, shoulders level, breathing steady. It was almost disorienting. No triumph, no demand. Just presence. Her mother steadied herself with the rail, pain visible but contained, and looked at her daughter with a mixture of fear and pride. The nod she gave was small, private, the kind only a mother could give. The driver finally forced motion back into the night. He pulled to the curb, hazard lights blinking red across wet pavement. "Police are on their way," he called out, voice practiced flat. But the tremor hiding under the words betrayed him. Passengers couldn't sit still anymore. Some were already halfway to the doors, some comparing shaky videos on their screens, some whispering theories. A woman in scrubs murmured, "That's how you stop it," as if she'd just seen something that rewrote her idea of power. The man folded inward, arms braced on his knees, his shoulders hunched as though the jacket he wore had grown too heavy. He looked up once, just for a heartbeat, and found Rhonda still standing there. The contact lasted less than a second, but it snapped his gaze back to the floor, where he seemed determined to keep it. Her silence filled the aisle more than his shouting ever had. 2 officers boarded, their uniforms carrying in the wet air. Neutral faces, trained voices. The driver pointed quickly, first at the man, then at the older woman, then at Rhonda. He didn't attempt to explain. He knew there was nothing he could add to the recording phones hadn't already taken. "Everyone stay calm," the taller officer said. His words fell into an audience that wasn't chaotic, but charged, waiting for a verdict. He crouched near the man. "Are you injured?" The man nodded too fast. A passenger with a paramedic's voice leaned in, checked his wrist, then announced loudly, "He's fine." It was both medical fact and moral judgment. The second officer turned toward Rhonda. "Ma'am, would you like to make a statement?" She lifted her palm, not dismissive but directing. "Please check my mother first." Her tone carried no anger, just order of priority. They did. The older woman insisted she was bruised but not broken. She endured the flashlight in her eyes, the palpating hands, then sat straighter than before. The officer scribbled notes. When he finished, he asked the question everyone had been circling. "What did you say to him?" The bus leaned toward her. Passengers stopped mid-breath. Dozens of phones tilted to catch her lips. Rhonda didn't answer. She looked at the man still hunched in his seat. For the first time he shifted under the weight of her gaze, blinking hard, mouth dry. She finally spoke, her voice low, steady. "That was for him. Not for you." It wasn't defiance. It wasn't explanation. It was a boundary, clean and unyielding. The officer accepted it because there was nothing else to do. The bus released its breath in murmurs. Frustration from some, awe from others, endless speculation from all. Theories spun instantly. She threatened him, she forgave him, she reminded him of his mother, she promised he'd never forget. The guesses multiplied faster than the bus could empty. One by one, passengers stepped into the wet street. A teenager paused by her seat, hoodie hanging loose, and said quietly, "We needed that." Then he left, shoulders straighter than before. A woman wiped her cheeks. A man muttered, "He'll never do that again." The story had already fractured into versions, each reflecting the witness more than the event. The man shuffled out under police escort, head bent low. The crowd didn't jeer, didn't applaud. They just watched him vanish into the night, small now, smaller than the shadow he had cast. Rhonda and her mother stepped down last. Cold air hit them, damp with rain and exhaust. Hazard lights painted the street in pulses of red. The driver caught her eye through the glass, lifting 2 fingers from the wheel in a gesture of thanks. She gave the smallest nod back, then turned away. The city swallowed the bus's noise into its own hum, but inside every passenger who had been there, the silence stayed. The silence of a fight that ended without a punch, of words no one heard but everyone wanted. And you, listening now, would you want to know what she said? Because after those words, his life will never be the same.